Robb Stark gazed out over the wide, placid waters of the Green Fork, its surface gilded by the waning afternoon sun. Behind him, the sounds of his army drifted like a dissonant symphony, horses stamping, men murmuring, steel clanking. Though he was clad in armor and weighed by the responsibilities of a king, he felt an unexpected sense of calm. He had reached the crossroads of what felt like fate itself. The twins towered ahead, stark gray stone mirrored in the river, and with them came his promise to wed one of Lord Walder Frey's daughters. He had not pictured his life unfolding this way. The war was supposed to have been simpler. He was to avenge his father, reclaim the North's autonomy, and protect his family. His marriage had been an afterthought, a pawn moved on the board to gain the Frey's crucial alliance. And yet, in this moment, that alliance was no longer just a means to an end. It had become the hinge on which his family's survival might swing. A vow had been made, and he intended to keep it, for the sake of honor, duty, and the dream of a future that was anything other than endless war. His mother, Lady Catelyn, stood to his left, her cloak fluttering in a timid breeze that rolled off the river. He could see the weary lines in her face, but also her resolute spirit. She looked at him, brow furrowing for a moment before she spoke. "We've come so far, Robb," she said quietly. "Remember who you are. You have the North behind you, but alliances are everything in this war. Keep your heart steady." He inclined his head. "I remember, Mother. I do this for the North, for our house, for every man and woman who has followed me. I won't dishonor them." The words were simple, but each carried the weight of his father's teachings, the memory of the look on Eddard Stark's face whenever the subject of honor was raised. The quiet stoicism of his father had guided Robb all his life. Now, more than ever, he felt that memory guiding him across this narrow bridge to House Frey. They sounded the horns announcing their arrival at the foot of the first twin, a castle that spanned the river on its watery foundation, twin towers connected by a fortified bridge. Soldiers of House Frey peered down from the battlements. Some wore the twin tower sigil on dull tabards. Others merely lounged, as though curious about the young Wolf King who had returned to keep the promise he once forged. The portcullis lifted. A band of Frey men filed out, led by Ser Ryman Frey, one of the many grandsons of the venerable Walder Frey. Ryman's eyes flicked with an almost feral keenness. "King in the North," he called, bowing in an exaggerated manner. "Lord Grandfather awaits you." Robb nodded. "Lead on." They crossed under the raised portcullis, the shadows of the gatehouse swallowing them. All around, the pungent smells of the castle assaulted Robb's senses. Unwashed bodies, the gamey scent of slaughtered animals, and the stale reek of turned earth near the stables. Frey men-at-arms clustered in corners, suspicious eyes tracking the king in the North's every movement. There was little warmth in their gazes. Alliance or no, trust was a rare coin these days, and Robb understood that all too well. In the great hall, Walder Frey sat at his high table. Surrounded by a confusing tangle of his offspring, the old man looked like a desiccated spider at the center of its web, body frail but cunning glint in his gaze. He lifted a spidery hand in greeting. His voice, though tremulous with age, carried across the stone hall. "King Robb Stark, come, show me this face of yours. You were younger the last time I saw you. TSK, time marches on, doesn't it?" Robb approached, mindful to keep his composure. The entire hall was silent except for the scraping of a few wooden chairs. Candles burned in chandeliers overhead. The hush was so absolute that Robb imagined he could hear the flicker of every flame. "Lord Walder," he said evenly, "I have come to honor my vow." The old man's thin lips parted. It might have been a smile, it might have been something else entirely. "Yes, yes, you have." "Then let it be said, Walder Frey is not the only keeper of oaths under this roof." He peered around at his brood, bony fingers drumming on the tabletop. "You all heard him. The king has returned to wed. Which one will he choose, The wolf shall have his bride, so all the realm will see what that's worth." An uncomfortable ripple of laughter came from some of the younger Freys, while the older ones merely pursed their lips or looked down. Walder gestured absently for his daughters and granddaughters to line up or step forward. There were so many of them, a veritable parade of varied shape, color, and countenance. Some were pretty, some were not, some looked shy and withdrawn, others seemed brazen as they stared unabashedly at Robb's face. In a corner of his mind, he remembered that moment from months ago when he had first crossed the twins to outmaneuver Tywin Lannister's forces. Back then, he had only begun to grapple with the intricacies of alliance and duty. That younger version of himself had made hasty promises, marriage among them, to secure a crossing. The memory of that youthful vow made him wonder which of these Frey girls he would end up bound to. The old man snapped his fingers. "Well, boy, do you remember any names? Or must I recite them for you like a child's lesson?" Robb held his composure. "I would be honored if you would introduce me, Lord Walder." He attempted to infuse a gentle courtesy into his tone, but he knew the patriarch saw right through it. Walder Frey's pleasure, at least, seemed genuine enough as he proceeded to name each young woman in turn. Their eyes flicked from Robb to their father or grandfather, every one of them standing with some measure of anxiety. Lord Walder's voice was surprisingly hearty. "This is Arwen, that's Waldra, there's Maria, Roslin, Sherray, and so forth." He introduced them from the comely and the timid to the plain and the bold. Finally, he raised his hand. "Choose one, your grace. Let us see what your honor is worth." Catelyn Stark placed a reassuring hand on Robb's elbow. Even her touch, though gentle, carried the gravity of a mother's silent advice. Choose wisely, but do not keep them waiting. Robb felt a sudden tension in his chest. How was he to know which choice would forge a stronger alliance or bring him a measure of peace? His father had taught him that marriage was about family, about forging alliances, about ensuring stability, but his father had also taught him the importance of genuine respect. That, at least, might guide him to the right decision. He looked over the Frey girls, scanning their features, trying not to appear cold in his appraisal, but also not letting himself be guided merely by beauty. Roslin Frey, with her soft brown hair and big, doe-like eyes, caught his gaze. He noticed a certain tremor in her posture, but behind that timidness he could sense a quiet strength. He stepped forward, took one careful breath, and then spoke, his voice echoing through the hall. "If it pleases Lord Walder," he said, "I would ask for Roslin Frey's hand." A hush settled in the hall. Walder Frey studied him, ancient eyes narrowed, measuring. He looked at Roslin, who stood wide-eyed, and sniffed. "She's a sweet girl, or so I'm told." "You could do worse," he said with a flippant shrug. Then he cackled, a sound that rose sharply. "Yes, Roslin it is. And so the wolf and the pup shall be wed. May the gods old and new help them both." Cheers, half-hearted from some corners, rose as a smattering of applause. Roslin managed a shy curtsy, her cheeks blooming with color. Robb felt the tension in his chest soften. There was no going back now. He had sealed his fate, and House Frey's support for the northern cause was secured, at least for the moment. As much as Walder Frey's alliances could ever be counted upon, Robb hoped it would hold. They stood that evening in a smaller side hall as the betrothal feast began, both armies mixing cautiously, each side suspicious. But there was some semblance of merriment in the air. Frey men refilled pitchers of ale and wine, carrying them around to each table, while northern banner men feasted on roasted fowl and warm bread. The music of fiddles and drums mingled with the hum of cautious conversation. Robb found himself seated at the high table beside Roslin, with Lady Catelyn to his other side. Lord Walder's brood spread down the table, and the man himself presided like a watchful vulture from the top seat. There was something unnerving about the old lord's direct stare. Yet when Robb turned to Roslin, the tension in him eased. She was quietly picking at her food, hardly touching the honey-glazed quail. Her eyes flicked to him and then away. He took a moment to lower his voice and speak. "My lady," he said gently, "I hope this marriage does not frighten you. I know these are difficult times." Her gaze rose, lips parted in a small moment of surprise. Then she lowered her eyes again. "They are, my lord. But I will do my duty to my house and to you. I only hope I can be a good wife to a king." Her sincerity disarmed him. He had expected cunning or artifice, but he glimpsed a simple honesty in her. "I'm not much of a king, truth be told," Robb said under his breath. "I'm just a son and a brother thrust into a war. I'll do my duty too. You have my word." The corner of her mouth curved in a timid smile. Then Lord Walder interrupted them by rapping his cane on the tabletop. "Yes, yes, sweet talk and courtesy. Let's hope it lasts. King Robb, if you're not too busy charming my granddaughter, I'd like to know when we can expect the wedding. The men grow restless. If we're all to ride to battle soon, I want to see some binding ties." Catelyn, with her innate diplomacy, intervened. "Lord Walder, the king must plan his next moves carefully. But we need not wait long for the wedding. A fortnight, perhaps?" Walder Frey sniffed loudly, spinning his cane. "A fortnight, is it? That's an awfully long time for the wolf to reconsider. I say it happens in 7 days. That's plenty of time to gather a feast and prepare a septon, if you ask me." Robb interjected. 7 days then. We'll be wed and the alliance sealed before the realm. He felt the weight of his choice as soon as the words left his mouth. 7 days. That was enough time to prepare for the ceremony, but scarcely enough to let him catch his breath, or gave no man the luxury of slow time. This was a world in chaos. A fortnight might cost him an entire campaign's advantage. He might as well seal the vow swiftly. The night wore on with forced revelry. Laughter rang hollow from some of Walder's grandsons. Wine flowed, though not too freely, as if everyone were on guard. Eventually, Robb and his mother rose from the table, the cool air of the courtyard beckoning them. The sky was splashed with stars, and the hush of the river drifted up over the walls. Caitlin walked beside him in silence until they stood under a torch sconce near the stables. She rested a hand on his shoulder. "I'm proud of you for honoring your promise," she said quietly. "It can't be easy, forced into this so young. I want you to know your father would be proud." Robb nodded, a lump forming in his throat. He wished his father could see him now, or at least guide him. But Eddard Stark's wisdom lived on in the memories of those he loved. "I can't let the North fall apart because of my mistakes," he said. "This marriage will hold the Freys at our side. It's the right choice." Her eyes glistened for a moment, reflecting the torchlight. "It is. But do not forget that alliances are half a thing if there is no trust. Earn Roslin's trust and show the Freys that honor binds us stronger than fear." He exhaled, a slow breath that seemed to carry months of tension. "I understand." Outside the castle walls, the Northmen had set their camp. Tents fluttered in the breeze, and the banners of House Stark, Grey Dire Wolf on a field of white, hung above the largest pavilions. Many men were already curled up in their bedrolls, snoring away the day's anxieties, while the night guard patrolled the perimeter. But the knowledge that Walder Frey's men had a fortress at their backs and the advantage of terrain left every Northman uneasy. This alliance was essential, and it hinged on the union that was now only 7 days away. In his private tent, Robb dismissed his guards and tried to rest. Grey Wind, his dire wolf, prowled inside. The beast's glowing eyes regarded Robb in a silent communion. The wolf seemed to sense his restlessness, letting out a low, soft growl. Robb reached to scratch behind Grey Wind's ears, feeling the coarse fur as he let his own tension slip away in that simple, wordless bond. He thought of Roslin, of the haunting timidness in her eyes. A pang of guilt twinged his heart. He had led his men into war. He had spurned the vow once, in the story told to the realm, by wedding a foreign woman or, in the strictest sense, being unfaithful to Walder Frey's arrangement. But in this version of the world, that had not happened. He had come back. He was doing what was right, or so he told himself. The weight of destiny pressed upon him, heavier than plate armor. If he failed, it would not only be his downfall but the downfall of the North, and that possibility kept his eyes open long into the night. Morning brought a haze of dew over the courtyard, shimmering in the rising sun. Over the next few days, the castle was alive with preparations. Servants scrambled to make the halls presentable, washing rushes, hanging fresh banners, and ordering hogsheads of wine and ale. The Frey girls giggled in corridors when they saw Robb pass. Robb's bannermen observed warily, reluctant to trust any open display of hospitality from House Frey. Yet the machinery of wedding celebration churned on, unstoppable. Caitlin oversaw what she could, advising Roslin on northern customs and ensuring that everything would go smoothly. Roslin, for her part, had begun to warm to her future husband's mother. Robb sensed that the quiet girl found Caitlin's presence reassuring. He himself had little time for pleasantries. There were war councils to hold, ravens to send, strategies to finalize. The next campaign, likely aimed at driving the Lannisters from the Riverlands, would begin almost immediately after the wedding. But for all the martial demands, Robb made certain he spent time with Roslin, learning her thoughts, her fears, and the hopes she rarely voiced. In their stolen private moments, brief walks through the courtyard, or a quiet corner of the Great Hall, Robb discovered that Roslin was not entirely naive. She understood House Frey's precarious position, perched on the edge of alliances. She understood how swiftly fortunes could change. "My lord father is a prudent man," she said, choosing her words carefully, though many call him something less flattering. "But he will keep his word if you keep yours. And perhaps I can help, in my own small way, to keep the peace between our houses." Her gentleness moved him in a way he had not anticipated. There was sincerity in her, an almost childlike quality, but behind it Robb detected the steel of a survivor, someone who had grown up in a nest of vipers, who learned to watch and wait. He found himself grateful for her companionship, a small island of calm in the chaotic swirl of war. So the days slipped by with disconcerting speed. The Septon arrived, an aging man with watery eyes who had served House Frey for decades. Walder Frey stalked the halls with renewed energy, barking orders and complaining about trifles. His brood teased Rosalind or chattered among themselves about the momentous occasion a king in the north was about to join their family. The fact that a king would be wedding a Frey might have been a source of pride, but Walder Frey's suspicion never rested. If anything, it seemed heightened. Then, on the eve of the ceremony, a warm wind blew from the south, carrying the first sense of spring, though winter might loom. Robb stood on the ramparts of the eastern twin, gazing at the endless ribbons of the Green Fork. From up here, he felt the precarious balance of everything in his life. One misstep, and the alliances he'd fought for, the battles he'd won, all of it could crumble. Caitlin found him there, stepping lightly across the worn stone. "Tomorrow," she said. "Are you ready?" He gave a half-laugh, a quiet, breathy thing that scarcely passed for amusement. "I suppose I must be. I've never been a husband before." She smiled with maternal warmth. "You'll manage. And you'll honor your vow. That's more than many men can say in these times." The next morning dawned bright, with birdsong drifting over the ramparts. Servants rushed to decorate the yard and the great hall where the vows would be exchanged. Most of House Stark's bannermen, as well as many Freys, were dressed in their finery. Banners rippled in the breeze, the direwolf of House Stark, the twin towers of House Frey. The rest of the guests stood in a circle around a makeshift sept raised near the open courtyard for the ceremony. Many of the Northmen were more familiar with the old gods than the new, but tradition demanded a septon for this union as Walder Frey adhered to the faith of the Seven. Robb waited at the altar wearing a doublet of dark gray and a cloak trimmed with the fur of a direwolf. Grey wind was not permitted in the ceremonial space. Too many Freys had objected to having a monstrous wolf near the feasting. Instead, the great beast remained tethered outside the circle, hackles occasionally lifting at the presence of so many unfamiliar scents. Robb's eyes flicked to the crowd, seeing the faces of his men. Great John Umber, who looked ready to burst out in boisterous laughter at any moment. Roose Bolton, whose pale eyes and quiet demeanor were as unsettling as ever, and others who had served him well. Then Rosalind appeared, guided by Walder Frey. Her gown was pale blue, simple but elegant, cinched at the waist with silver thread. Her hair was braided, and while her eyes were downcast, she lifted them occasionally as she walked. There was a nervousness to her steps, but also a resolute acceptance in her bearing. Walder Frey brought her forward, his demeanor a curious blend of gruff pride and unhidden suspicion. The septon began the rites, voice trembling with age but clear enough to echo around them. Robb heard each word as though it were echoing from a far distance, describing the unity of houses, the blessings of the Seven, the responsibilities each partner held. He took Rosalind's hands in his own, feeling how cold her fingers were. He squeezed gently, trying to offer reassurance. She looked up at him with a flicker of gratitude. "Do you, Robb of House Stark, king in the north, take this woman as your lawful wife?" asked the septon. Robb spoke in a voice steady and low. "I do. And do you, Rosalind of House Frey, take this man as your lawful husband?" Rosalind's cheeks flushed under so many watchful eyes. "I do," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but audible enough to be heard by those closest. "Then by the power granted me by the Seven, I declare you husband and wife. May the gods look favorably upon your union." Cheers and applause followed, though some seemed forced. Walder Frey clapped half-heartedly, leaning on his cane with a faintly smug grin. Robb leaned in and kissed Rosalind's cheek, her skin soft and warm beneath his lips. For a moment, he felt a whirl of conflicting emotions, relief, resolve, and a flicker of hope that maybe this would bring some measure of peace. A roar of approval came from the Northmen, who began chant. "And the king in the north." Some of the Freys joined in, though Robb couldn't help but notice the guarded expressions on many of their faces. Politics and marriage were so intertwined in this world that personal happiness was seldom more than a side note. Still, for that one instant, Robb let himself believe that honor might bring its own reward. The feast that followed was a riot of sound and food. Great platters of roast boar, pheasant, venison, and fish were brought forth. Wine and ale flowed. Minstrels plucked strings and sang ballads, though there was a persistent undertone of tension. Walder Frey presided at the high table beside Robb and Rosalind, occasionally muttering pointed remarks about how the Northmen should not forget who had aided them. If the old man was a venomous spider, he was at least sated for the moment, content with the successful wedding that might cement a place for his family's power. Robb tried to keep conversation pleasant. He turned to Rosalind whenever possible, asking about her childhood, her mother, her siblings, but she rarely spoke more than a few sentences at a time. Her eyes kept darting to Walder Frey, as if seeking permission. "It is a fine feast," she said once softly. "I hope you are pleased." He gave her a small smile. "I am." Meanwhile, the Northmen indulged in their cups. The Great John attempted to coax Bolton into drinking more, which the latter refused with polite courtesy and unsettling stares. Ricard Karstark drank in stoic silence, eyes occasionally flicking to the Freys. Others ate voraciously, weary from days of lean rations while traveling. However, all seemed mindful that they were inside the Frey's seat of power. Despite the illusions of merriment, the tension coiled beneath the surface. As the night wore on, Robb slipped away momentarily to check on Grey Wind. He found the direwolf pacing outside, a low growl reverberating in his chest at the presence of so many strangers. A group of Frey guards eyed the beast warily from a distance. Robb crouched beside Grey Wind and rested a hand on his flank. "Easy, boy," he murmured. "Just a little longer, and we'll be gone from here." Grey Wind's hackles smoothed under Robb's reassuring pat, though the wolf's ears remained alert. The tension in the castle had not escaped the beast's instinct. Returning to the hall, he realized the dancing had begun. Servants cleared tables from the center of the floor, and minstrels struck up a lively tune. Men and women whirled in pairs, though the sense of joy felt forced. He spotted Rosalind sitting in quiet stillness at the high table. He stepped forward and offered his hand, inviting her to dance. She blushed as she rose, and together they found a small space amidst the swirling couples. The music was swift, and though Robb was hardly adept, he tried his best to move in time with her. They circled each other. She was light on her feet, and even in her timidity, she displayed a hint of joy. When the dance ended, applause scattered around them. He led her back to the table. The closeness of her presence made him realize how young she truly was, how uncertain. And yet, in his own youth, he felt a certain kinship. They were both pawns in a great game, doing what they must to keep the fractious realm from devouring them. At last, the feast began to wind down. Many men were drunk or close to it. The Great John sang a bawdy northern song that caused a few of the Frey women to blush and titter. Others simply retired, claiming exhaustion. Walder Frey insisted, with exaggerated courtesy, that Robb and Rosalind retire to the bedchamber prepared for them. There was a momentary hush in the hall as these words were spoken, an unspoken acknowledgement of what the wedding night entailed. Rosalind's cheeks flared with color, while Robb maintained a solemn mask. "Come, King," croaked Walder Frey. "Surely you can manage to bed a wife tonight. Better not keep your bride waiting." That brought out a ripple of titters. He gestured with a jerky motion. "Go on, then." Caitlin rose from her seat as well, signifying her acceptance. She placed a soft kiss on Robb's cheek, whispering, "Be kind to her. She is your wife now." Robb inclined his head. Then, taking Rosalind by the hand, he led her from the hall to the chamber that had been prepared. Torches and rushlights lit the corridors. Outside the door stood 2 Frey guards, who bowed stiffly and moved aside. Robb and Rosalind stepped in, closing the heavy wooden door behind them. The chamber was moderately furnished, with a large bed draped in furs, and a single window that overlooked the courtyard. A small fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows. For a moment, they both paused, uncertain. She stood near the door, delicate hands clasped before her. He felt a sudden surge of awkwardness, remembering that though he was king in the north, he was also just a young man who had never been in this situation before. But he steeled himself, recalling his duty and his promise to his mother to be kind. He slowly approached her, removing the fur cloak and setting it on a nearby chair. "Rosalind," he said gently, I know this must be difficult for you. I swear to you I won't hurt you." She lifted her eyes, meeting his gaze. In their depths, he saw a mix of anxiety and a flickering trace of trust. "Thank you," she whispered. "I want to do my duty as your wife. I'm not sure what you expect of me." He offered the most reassuring smile he could manage. "I only expect that we share in each other's burdens, as husband and wife should. We'll figure the rest out together." Carefully, he raised a hand to her cheek. she did not flinch. The rest of the night was a quiet negotiation of closeness, each hesitant, each reassuring the other in whispered words and gentle touches. If a war had not been raging outside these walls, if they had been free from the chain of politics, perhaps they might have shared a simple moment of tenderness untainted by the demands of duty. But the world was not so kind. When dawn broke, a faint gray light spilled through the single window, illuminating the bed and its disheveled furs. Robb stirred, half-waking. Rosalind lay beside him, her soft breathing blending with the crackle of dying embers in the hearth. He slipped from the bed carefully, trying not to wake her. A swirl of mixed feelings coursed through him, gratitude for her gentleness, guilt for having bound her to a war. He gazed down at her, her hair cascading across the pillow, and thought perhaps they might find some measure of contentment in each other's company. He draped a corner of the fur over her shoulder, then dressed quietly. Outside, the twins had already awakened. Men were mulling about, some hungover, some eager to be gone. The yard smelled of horse sweat and damp straw. Northmen prepared their mounts, and Robb could see that the wedding feast was well and truly over. It was time to move, time to take the next steps in a war that had ravaged the Riverlands and cast a long shadow over the north. At a long table by the stables, Robb found Bolton, Karstark, and the Great John awaiting his orders. Catelyn stood nearby, conferring with Ser Brynden Tully, her uncle, the Blackfish, who had arrived just after the feast. A sense of urgency thrummed in the morning air. They could not linger here forever. The Great John's loud voice boomed. "We should press on, my king. Word is that Tywin marches west again. We can't let him slip away." Karstark's expression was grim. "He's regrouping. This wedding has cost us time. We need to be at the forefront." Bolton tilted his head slightly. "There's also the matter of Harrenhal. If we can move swiftly, we may secure it before Tywin can reinforce. The fortress is half ruined, but it remains a strategic stronghold." Robb listened, brow furrowed. "We have the Frey's support now, or so they claim. That will add to our numbers, but we can't rely on them alone. We must choose a target that gives us an advantage without overextending." It was Catelyn who spoke up next. "My son, you have new family obligations as well. Walder Frey expects a certain courtesy if he is to remain loyal. He won't appreciate being used and tossed aside." The Great John snorted. "The old weasel can wait. We have a war to win." Bolton's pale eyes flicked between mother and son. "Still, it might be unwise to slight Lord Walder so soon after the wedding. He could make trouble if he feels disrespected." Robb inhaled, gathering his thoughts. "We ride in 2 days. That should be enough time to finalize the terms of his support. I'll speak to Lord Walder and ensure he understands that the defense of the Riverlands helps House Frey as well. Once we've come to an agreement, we move." They all assented, if somewhat grudgingly. The tension that hovered was not unexpected. Dealing with Walder Frey was a precarious dance. In the best of times, he was a difficult ally. True to his intention, Robb found Walder Frey in his solar later that day. The old man was sitting behind a large wooden desk, its surface cluttered with scraps of parchment. He looked up, an expression of wary amusement crossing his features. "Ah, our new bridegroom. How's the little bird? Not too frightened, I hope." Robb kept his posture straight, arms at his sides. "She's well, and I thank you for her hand. I trust this marriage secures our alliance." The old man chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "You think a vow before the 7 and a tumble in the sheets is all it takes, boy? Walder Frey doesn't give his loyalty so cheaply. But you're my good son now, so I will say this: you treat Rosalind well, and you don't break faith with me, and I will keep my men at your side. But if I catch even a whiff of betrayal, the twins will close to you like a snapped gate." Robb nodded. "That's fair. I'll do my part. I ask only that you supply the troops you promised and help us hold the Riverlands against the Lannisters. We have much to do." Walder rapped his cane on the floor. "And do it we shall. I want to see those golden-haired bastards kneeling in their own blood as much as you do. They've looked down on me long enough. But be warned, if you fail, if your cause falls apart, don't expect Walder Frey to go down with you." Robb swallowed a sharp retort. He had to remember that this man was now family in name if not in spirit. "We won't fail," he said, his jaw set. "I'll see that House Frey is remembered for standing with the North." The old man's eyes gleamed. "See that you do." With that uneasy assurance, Robb took his leave. Outside, he saw Rosalind walking in the courtyard with 2 of her younger sisters. She spotted him and offered a timid smile. He walked over, ignoring the stares of the other Frey girls, who giggled and whispered behind their hands. "Robb," Rosalind said softly, inclining her head. She dropped the formal address of my lord, which he found strangely comforting. He glanced at her sisters. They stared back, wide-eyed and curious. "Would you join me for a walk?" she ventured. He was surprised but nodded. The younger girls took the hint and scampered off, leaving them relatively alone in the courtyard. Together, they strolled toward one of the walls overlooking the greenish expanse of the river. The day was fair, with pale sunlight shimmering on the current. She placed a hand on the stone battlement, face turned to the breeze. "How are you?" he asked. "I know all of this has been overwhelming." She lowered her eyes, then lifted them again, meeting his gaze in earnest. "I feel as if I've stepped onto a battlefield. Perhaps not one with swords and arrows, but still a battlefield of sorts." Her voice grew quieter. I don't know what my father truly plans or what you face in this war, but I do know I want to help. If I can ease tensions or speak for you when needed, you have only to ask." Her offer touched him more deeply than he expected. He had been prepared for a Frey bride to be cunning or manipulative or entirely indifferent to him. But Rosalind seemed genuine in her desire to be of use, to bridge the gap between their two families. "You've done enough just by being here," he said gently. "I know you had no choice in this marriage, and I'm grateful that you're willing to stand by me." She looked out over the water. "Choice or not, I hope we might find some happiness. The world is dark enough without adding more despair." Robb reached out, covering her hand with his own, feeling the warmth of her fingers. "So do I." 2 days later, the time came for the northern host to ride. Walder Frey begrudgingly assembled a contingent of 2,000 men, mostly foot soldiers, to join Robb's army. A sense of anticipation and uncertainty hovered in the air. Rosalind, mounted on a palfrey, rode beside Robb, flanked by her personal guard. They would travel eastward first, meeting up with forces loyal to Riverrun, and then decide their next move against Tywin Lannister's armies. Though part of Robb regretted taking Rosalind into such danger, he also knew leaving her behind at the Twins meant subjecting her to Walder Frey's manipulations without his protection. For her safety and for Unity's sake, it seemed best she come along. The roads were choked with mud and wagon ruts, courtesy of recent rains. Progress was slow, and the mood of the column ranged from weary to wary. Occasionally, Robb would ride alongside his banner men, discussing strategies for the coming campaign. Other times, he remained at Rosalind's side, answering her questions about the places they passed. She seemed both curious and uneasy, never having traveled far from the twins. Their first night on the road, they made camp in a field flanked by tall poplar trees. The tents were erected swiftly, campfires lit, and the watch set. Rosalind's tent was placed next to Robb's at the center of the encampment, with a ring of guards around them. She stayed inside for most of the evening, presumably unsettled by the roughness of war camp. Robb, after conferring with his commanders, decided to check on her. He found her seated on a simple camp stool, the soft glow of a lantern illuminating her face. She looked up, seeming relieved to see him. "I've never been outside the castle so long," she admitted, half laughing at her own nervousness. "The sounds of so many men, the smell of horses, the uncertainty, it's daunting." Robb stepped in, letting the tent flap fall behind him. "It can be hard to adjust," he said. "I've grown used to it, but I remember what it was like the first time I joined my father on a march. The noise, the constant moving, the sense that danger could strike at any moment. I won't pretend it's easy." He paused, taking a seat on a small chest. "But we do what we must. I'll make sure you're protected." She met his gaze, and something in her eyes spoke of gratitude and fear intermingled. "Thank you, Robb. I'll try to be brave." He gave a small smile. "You're braver than you know." In the days that followed, the army advanced deeper into the Riverlands, passing scorched farms and abandoned villages, evidence of the Lannisters' wrath. Smoke rose in the distance, and occasionally they found survivors who told tales of marauding soldiers. The devastation made Robb's jaw tighten with anger. He knew they had to strike back, to free these lands from the grip of House Lannister. Yet he also knew that war meant more suffering, a vicious cycle he could not easily break. Rosalind saw the burned-out husks of cottages, the fields salted with blood, and grew pale. "I didn't realize," she whispered, voice trembling, as they passed a small homestead where bodies lay half-buried in ashes. "The world can be so cruel." Her eyes shone with unshed tears. Robb reached out and took her hand in the saddle. "Yes, it is cruel. That's why we fight, to put an end to it, if we can." The Frey soldiers marched behind the main force, grumbling at the pace, but making no open complaint. Walder Frey's eldest sons rode at the head of that column, keeping a watchful eye on Robb's every move, as if they might report back to their father any sign of weakness. It was a precarious alliance at best. Eventually, They reached the outer watchposts of Riverrun. The banners of House Tully fluttered in the wind, and a party of riders greeted them warmly. Edmure Tully, Robb's uncle, welcomed them into the fortress, relieved to have the king in the north reinforce the battered stronghold. The Blackfish rode with them as well, having scouted the area ahead. Inside Riverrun's halls, after a brief respite for hot food and rest, they convened a war council. Maps were spread over a large wooden table. Rivers, roads, and hills were marked with tokens to signify friend and foe. River lords, various Tully bannermen, and Robb's own northern lords crowded the chamber. Rosalind was not present. This was a space for battle plans, not for the timid new bride. Robb suspected she preferred it that way. Edmure spoke animatedly, indicating where Lannister forces had been sighted. They're spread thin, but Tywin's no fool. He'll regroup if we give him time. Meanwhile, Lord Roose Bolton's men have retaken some minor strongholds along the Trident. We might push further west, or we might attempt a feint to draw Tywin out. Ricard Karstark's expression was severe. We should crush them directly. Enough dancing around. Show them the might of the North and the Riverlands united. The Great John slammed a fist on the table. Aye, strike hard, strike fast. Bolton, calm as ever, replied. A direct assault on Tywin's main host could prove costly. We should consider drawing him into a disadvantageous position. Robb folded his arms. We need a clear plan, one that doesn't squander our men. I want to preserve as many lives as I can, not throw them away in a reckless charge. He looked around, seeking reason among his bannermen. We will move west, but we'll do so cunningly. I want scouts to gather more intelligence on Tywin's dispositions. Let him think we're disorganized. When we strike, it will be decisive. They continued to deliberate, eventually arriving at a tentative plan to feint toward the Golden Tooth and lure Tywin's forces into an ambush near the Red Fork. The details would need refining, but the direction was set. As the meeting broke up, Bolton lingered near Robb. My king, he said in a soft voice, I hope you'll keep an eye on the Freys in our midst. They are unpredictable allies. I would hate for them to complicate your strategy at a critical moment. Robb nodded, appreciating Bolton's caution despite his unsettling manner. I'm aware. Thank you, my lord. That night, Rosalind joined Robb for supper in a modest solar. While the rest of the castle's great hall teemed with soldiers, they found a quiet corner to eat in relative peace. She asked about the meeting, about what they planned. He hesitated, not wanting to burden her, but sensed her genuine concern. We're going west, he said simply. We aim to outmaneuver Tywin. It won't be easy, but we have good men and we have reason to fight. She sipped from a goblet of watered wine, gaze lowered. And the Frey men, will they truly stand with you? He considered his reply carefully. I believe they will, so long as they see benefit for themselves. Your father. He's a shrewd man, Rosalind. I must always be mindful of that. She grimaced slightly, but said nothing, perhaps out of filial loyalty or fear. Yet the look in her eyes spoke of understanding. In the days that followed, Robb led his united force out of Riverrun, crossing the Red Fork and moving westward in careful stages. Scouts reported sightings of Tywin's outriders, but no large engagement had yet taken place. Rain began to fall, turning roads to mud, slowing both sides. Tents became soaked and men grew weary of slogging through the muck. Yet onward they pressed, all the while keeping an eye out for the Lannister host. Rosalind, though unused to such hardship, proved more resilient than Robb had expected. She never complained openly, though she sometimes asked quiet questions like, how far must we go, or will we find shelter soon? He could see she was exhausted, her gentle frame not accustomed to long hours in the saddle, but she bore it stoically. At last, on a storm-racked afternoon, their scouts brought word that a sizable Lannister force was camped a few leagues to the southwest, near an abandoned mill on the banks of the Red Fork. Edmure Tully recognized the terrain, describing how it could be used to trap the enemy between the river and a steep ridge, if only they could time their movements precisely. Encamped in the rain-soaked field, Robb listened to the thunder boom overhead, sheets of water slanting down on the canvas of his command tent. Lords huddled around the map, dripping water onto the parchment. We strike at dawn, Robb decided. The storm will mask our approach. By the time the Lannisters realize we're upon them, it'll be too late. The Grey John grinned through his soaked beard. A fine plan, my king. Bolton gave a small nod. Let us hope the storm persists. And so the next morning, beneath the gunmetal sky still spitting rain, Robb ordered his army into motion. Rosalind would remain in the baggage train, guarded by a contingent of loyal Northmen and a handful of Frey's Robb felt he could trust. She watched him go with apprehension etched on her face, but she said nothing as he mounted his warhorse. The battle at the mill was swift and brutal. The Northmen and river men charged through the muddy fields, crossing the rain-swollen tributary at a shallow ford. Lannister sentries sounded alarms too late. Chaos erupted as the clash of steel, the screaming of horses, and the shouts of men drowned out the storm. Robb, astride his horse, led the vanguard with Grey Wind loping at his side, the direwolf's teeth bared in a snarl. The muddy ground sucked at their boots, making every movement treacherous. Yet the Lannisters were caught off guard, lines hastily formed, crossbowmen firing in panic. The Greyjoy's booming war cries echoed over the din as he cut through the Lannister flank. Karstark's men struck from the left, and soon the red and gold banners were teetering, men dropping them to save their skins. For a moment, Robb glimpsed a cluster of Frey soldiers. They paused, uncertain, before charging into the fray. He worried they might falter, but they joined the assault, albeit without the same ferocity as the Northerners. Still, it was enough. The Lannisters realized they were cornered, pinned against the rising banks of the river, many drowning as they tried to flee in heavy armor. In a matter of hours, the mill was taken. Smoke rose from scattered fires. Bodies littered the soaked earth, blood mingling with rainwater. Robb dismounted, chest heaving, adrenaline still pounding in his veins. Grey Wind snapped at a wounded enemy soldier who tried to crawl away. Robb placed a hand on the direwolf's shoulder to calm him. They had won another victory. The cost in lives was high, but nowhere near as catastrophic as it might have been. Tywin Lannister's forward force had been dealt a significant blow. A hush fell as the last pockets of resistance surrendered. Robb's men began the grim work of gathering the wounded and stripping the dead. When the battle ended, word was sent for the baggage train to approach. Rosalind arrived a few hours later, pale-faced at the sight of the carnage. Robb greeted her at the edge of the field. The stench of death hung heavily in the wet air. She averted her eyes from the worst sights, but her hands trembled. "It's over," Robb said softly, placing an arm around her shoulders, shielding her from the ghastly view. "We won." She nodded, swallowing. "So many dead." He grimaced, looking out over the pocked battlefield. "Yes, war spares no one." They made camp in the ruins of the mill for the night. Rain continued to fall in intermittent waves, as if the heavens wept for the slaughter below. Tents were pitched in the lee of broken walls. Fires crackled, trying to fend off the damp. Men huddled under whatever shelter they could find. In Robb's tent, Rosalind sat by a small brazier, trying to warm her hands. He entered, shaking off droplets of water from his cloak. She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the flicker of flames. "I don't know how you bear it," she said softly. He took a seat beside her, removing his soaked gloves. "I have to bear it. I'm the king in the north. My people need me to be strong." She hesitated, then laid a tentative hand on his arm. "I know, and I respect that. Just know you don't have to be strong every moment. You can lean on me if you need." Those words, simple and quiet, sent a warmth through him more potent than the brazier's heat. He reached for her hand, holding it gently. The battered world outside felt momentarily distant. He remembered that they were husband and wife, that beneath the political alliance, they were two souls trying to find solace. He sighed, voice low. "I never wanted any of this. I wanted to follow my father's footsteps, be a good lord of Winterfell. Instead, I'm fighting a war." Rosalind curled her fingers around his. "I never wanted to be a pawn in my father's game, either. But here we are." Silence lingered, the patter of rain on canvas the only sound. Then they embraced, drawing comfort from each other. There was no escaping their fate, but for those moments, they found a shared humanity that transcended alliances and vows. In the weeks that followed, their army advanced through the riverlands, scoring small victories and skirmishes. Word came that Tywin Lannister was furious at the loss of his forward force and that he was consolidating near the Gold Road. The strategy of drawing him out seemed to be working, albeit slowly. Frey soldiers remained aloof, but they obeyed orders. Rosalind often wrote letters to her father's household, reassuring them of her welfare and the progress of the campaign. Robb wondered what exactly she told Walder Frey, but he trusted she would not betray him. Their bond, fragile but growing, seemed to deepen with each passing day. Whenever the horrors of war weighed too heavily on him, Robb sought Rosalind's quiet presence. They would talk in hushed voices inside his tent or share a small meal in the open, ironically finding scraps of normalcy amid chaos. He learned she liked music, that she had once dreamed of seeing the sea, and that she felt guilty for leaving her younger siblings behind. He told her stories of Winterfell, of the hot springs and the crypts, of the dire wolves that roamed the Godwood. Yet shadows loomed over them. The war was far from won. Hostages were still held, alliances were tenuous, and dangers threatened on every side. The news from beyond their immediate battlefront spoke of other claimants to the throne, of Stannis Baratheon stirring in the east, of Balon Greyjoy threatening the northern coasts. Dark rumors circulated of kings rising and falling like leaves in an autumn gale. And somewhere in the midst of it all, Walder Frey's watchful presence loomed, a constant reminder that even a marriage vow might not keep House Frey loyal forever. Still, for each day that Robb managed to keep his army alive and united, he found a glimmer of hope. Perhaps with this marriage, this union of House Stark and House Frey, he had forged a different path than the bleak one that might have been. Perhaps he had a chance to restore peace to the north and Riverlands, though the price was steep, paid in blood and uneasy alliances. Late one evening, they camped near a ruined sept, its broken dome open to the starry sky. Robb and Rosalind wandered among the toppled columns, searching for a moment of calm. She looked up at the constellations. "My mother used to say the seven watch over us from the heavens," she murmured, her breath turning to mist in the chill air. Robb followed her gaze. "My gods are in the trees, in the old weirwoods. But if there are gods above, I hope they watch kindly on us tonight." She turned to him, eyes reflecting the faint moonlight. "I hope so too." They stood in silence, each consumed by their own thoughts. The war, the future, the uncertain tapestry of alliances, these concerns tightened their chests. But for that fleeting instant, they felt only the cold night air and the closeness of each other's presence. Robb reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. Her grip was steady, warm. Something passed between them. An unspoken acknowledgement of the road behind and the road ahead, bound together now, for good or ill. In that moment, if only for a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath, as if granting them one fragile instant of peace in a realm torn by war. They lingered among the broken columns of the old sept, listening to the wind that whistled through the cracks. The night around them felt vast, a reminder of how small they were in the grand scheme of warring kings and crumbling kingdoms. Robb eventually led Rosalind back to the heart of the camp, where torches illuminated a ring of tents. Sleep beckoned, though neither found easy rest. Come morning, a thin veil of mist clung to the ground, and the damp chill clutched at every man's bones. Edmure Tully and the Great John were already discussing the next maneuver over a steaming pot of oat porridge. Rosalind discreetly took her place with the camp followers and the Frey contingents, where she was treated with a mixture of watchful respect and guarded politeness. Even among the Frey soldiers, she stood apart. They recognized her now as Robb Stark's queen, effectively if not in name. She carried a certain gravity, but they did not jostle or tease her as they might have another young woman in the train. They sensed that she was both their tie and their leash to the king in the north. Robb and his commanders decided to continue pressing westward to test the outskirts of Lannister territory. Word from scouts said Tywin had turned south, perhaps to cover the approach to the Westerlands or to protect vulnerable gold mines that funded the Lannisters' war effort. No one was entirely certain. Ravens traveled daily in a flurry between Robb's host, Riverrun, and other allied holds, conveying scraps of intelligence. Even so, the movements of Tywin Lannister remained elusive. He had a knack for forging sudden new strategies just when his enemies believed they had divined his intentions. For a week, Robb led his host through the Riverlands, reclaiming scattered hamlets and chasing off roving Lannister outriders. Small skirmishes flared, swift and vicious, in pockets of farmland or under the shelter of sparse groves. Each time, the Northmen's discipline and cunning prevailed. The Freys fought dutifully, though without the zeal that animated the men who had followed Robb since the beginning. Victories mounted, and rumors spread among the peasantry that the young wolf had returned in force, that he would reclaim the Riverlands and drive the lions back into their den. Amid these battles and marches, Rosalind found ways to help. She oversaw the distribution of bread and clean water when local villagers came seeking refuge, and spoke gently to frightened children, reminding them that the armies would not harm them. Her kindness surprised many, both Frey and Northmen alike. It was as though they realized for the first time that the new Stark bride was far from a mere figurehead. Often, after dusk, when the tents glowed with lamplight, Robb would return to his pavilion, exhausted, splattered with mud and blood, and find Rosalind quietly waiting for him. She'd hand him a cloth for wiping his face, offer him a moment of solace. In that fragile ritual, something like trust grew between them. Yet for all their growing bond, war had a way of reminding them how tenuous their happiness was. Ravens carried ill news as well as good. Messages arrived about Balon Greyjoy's fleet menacing the northern coasts, with attacks reported on the Stony Shore and Deepwood Moat. Theon Greyjoy, once Robb's ward and friend, had vanished. No one knew if he lingered in Pike or was already at sea, preparing raids. Every new dispatch was a weight pressing on Robb's conscience. He felt the tether of Winterfell pulling him north even as the Riverlands demanded his presence. He could not be in two places at once. When the host made camp near Oldstones, an ancient ruin remembered in stories and songs, Robb called another council. They gathered in the remains of a weathered keep, the moonlight filtering through a collapsed roof. The northern lords came in their cloaks of fur and boiled leather, while the riverlords wore plainer garb. The Freys were present in small numbers, Ser Ryman Frey, a few other kin, and their men. Rosalind was not present for the council, but she watched from a distance, her expression tense. Edmure Tully placed a rough diagram of the region on a flat piece of stone that served as a makeshift table. The Lannister host could be regrouping here, he said, tapping near the mouth of the tumblestone. Or they might have split their forces, one portion to guard the pass to the Westerlands, the other to keep pressure on us should we advance further south. The Great John roared, "Let them split. We'll smash them in two places at once." Karstark's voice was harsh. "We have the numbers if we press the advantage. Your victory at the mill has them wary. One more blow and they may crumble." Bolton, ever cautious, narrowed his pale eyes. "Perhaps. But a cornered lion can still bite. We should ensure we have a secure position. The Riverlands are vast and our supply lines grow precarious." Robb studied the makeshift map. "We need to pin Tywin down or at least force him into a pitched battle on ground of our choosing. If he retreats into the Westerlands, it'll be far more difficult to dislodge him." Edmure murmured agreement. "We cannot let him slip away entirely." They debated strategies, with the Great John demanding a brash strike, Karstark nodding along, Bolton counseling patience, and Edmure trying to find a middle path. Through it all, Robb weighed the cost of every approach. Now that the Freys were with him, he sensed that the old man Walder, watching from afar, would judge every move. Too cautious, and the Freys might interpret it as weakness. Too aggressive, and their men might desert if losses mounted. He felt the precarious balance of power on every side. Eventually, they decided to move south by small increments, testing for Lannister defenses. If they found Tywin's host, they would maneuver for an advantage before giving open battle. Meanwhile, riders would carry word north to see what could be done about the Ironborn threat. Winterfell might be in peril. Robb was torn. Each new dawn brought him one step further from his childhood home, and the weight of being king in the north grew heavier. That night, in the seclusion of the modest tent set aside for him and Rosalind, he confessed some of these anxieties to her. She listened in silence as he spoke of the Iron Islands, of Theon, of the uncertain fate of his brothers and sisters who remained scattered, Sansa and Arya in King's Landing, Bran and Rickon in Winterfell. When he finished, she reached for his hand. "I wish I could ease these burdens," she said softly, "but I know so little of the North. I know only that you are fighting for them, for your home." He exhaled slowly. "I am, but sometimes I feel as though every direction holds a new threat. My father always told me that a lord's first duty is to protect his people. But how do I protect them all?" Rosalind hesitated, then spoke with gentle resolve. "By continuing to do what you're doing. You are a good man, Robb. My father, well, he's never called anyone good except himself, but I see it in you. Trust the loyalty of your men. Trust yourself. I know that might not sound like much, but it's all I can offer." He squeezed her hand. Sometimes the smallest comforts are the greatest. They stayed close that night, listening to the rain tap upon the tent's canvas and the distant voices of sentries. In the hush, amid the unrelenting demands of war, they found a fragile sense of belonging with each other. The army moved on. Days bled into weeks as they probed deeper into territory once held firmly by the Lannisters. They encountered pockets of resistance, battles that flared and subsided with grim speed. In one such fight near the forks of the Blackwater Rush, they clashed with a band of Sells-Words hired by the Lannisters. The men fought fiercely but were ultimately routed. One of the captured leaders spat curses at Robb when dragged before him, proclaiming that Tywin Lannister would soon crush the Stark pretensions. Robb had him sent to Edmure Tully for interrogation, gleaning whatever intelligence could be found. Though the encounters were often victorious, they took their toll. Men were wounded or lost to the wet ground and the shifting terrain. Horses stumbled and broke legs in sudden ditches. Supplies ran low, forcing foraging expeditions to comb the countryside. Each farmstead they came upon was a sad reflection of war's damage: burned huts, fields stripped bare, frightened peasants peering from behind shuttered windows. The war's cruelty weighed on Robb. Yet he pressed on, for each step pinned Tywin further from the heart of the Riverlands. If he could defeat Tywin in open battle, he believed the tide of the war might finally turn. In the midst of these maneuvers, Rosalind became a fixture in the camp's daily life. Her soft-spoken kindness gained her a modest respect among the foot soldiers. The Frey men, seeing her new standing, were careful to keep their distance. Some approached her with deference, inquiring about her father's health or asking if she had letters from the twins. She replied courteously, though she shared little detail. The reality was, any letter from Walder Frey was bound to be full of subtle barbs, demands, and veiled threats. She read them quietly in her tent, sometimes frowning. Whenever Robb asked about the contents, she would say only, "He wants to ensure we remain steadfast in the alliance." One evening, as they camped near a stretch of marshy land, Rosalind received a fresh letter bearing her father's seal. She opened it in Robb's presence. The message was short, written in Walder Frey's spidery scrawl. It congratulated her on the continued successes of the northern host, but demanded assurances that House Frey would be rewarded for its loyalty. Lands, titles, perhaps a marriage arrangement for one of Walder's sons or grandsons to a suitable lady of the north. Implicitly, the old man wanted more than just the promise of gratitude. Robb saw her expression tighten. "He's very direct," she murmured, handing Robb the parchment. Robb scanned the words, face darkening. "He asks for the Hornwood lands as a possible gift?" he said, recalling a region in the north that had been left vulnerable by the death of Lord Hornwood. The Hornwood inheritance was a complicated matter, but it belonged rightfully to the Hornwood line, or to a northern house with a more legitimate claim. "He can't possibly believe I'd give that to him. He believes he can try," she replied with a wry sadness. "My father isn't shy about overreaching." Robb set the letter aside. "The Freys have been indispensable to some of our victories, but the Hornwood lands are not mine to parcel out on a whim. I'll have to draft a careful reply." Slyn lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry my family makes these demands. I wish it were otherwise." He reached for her hand. "You're not to blame for your father's ambitions." Despite the friction, Robb composed a response that night, diplomatically avoiding a direct refusal but making no promise to grant Hornwood to the Freys. He emphasized the continued alliance, the shared goal of defeating the Lannisters, and his respect for Lord Walder. The letter was sealed and dispatched by Raven the next morning. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Robb couldn't help but wonder if Walder Frey would resent the subtle slight. Before the Raven could even reach the twins, fresh tidings arrived, some good, some ill. A rider from the River Lords brought word that Stannis Baratheon had suffered a major defeat at King's Landing, repelled by wildfire and Lannister cunning. That meant the capital would not fall to Stannis, and the Lannisters' hold on the Iron Throne remained firm under King Joffrey. Meanwhile, there were rumors that Balon Greyjoy had crowned himself King of the Isles and the North, launching raids on the coastline from the Neck to Winterfell itself. The news pressed Robb's heart like a vice, stoking his fear for his brothers. He felt anew the pull of his homeland, the need to protect what was his by right. He conferred with his mother, Lady Catelyn, who had rejoined him for the campaign, determined to advise him as best she could. Standing in a quiet corner of camp near a stand of birch trees, she clasped his arm. "Robb, the North needs you. If Balon Greyjoy truly means to seize our lands, Winterfell may be in peril. You're brothers." He set his jaw. "I know, but if I abandon the Riverlands now, everything we've fought for here will unravel. Tywin would sweep in the moment we marched north. The Riverlords would be left to face him alone, and we'd lose this alliance." She nodded grimly. "You must find a way to defend both. Your men will follow where you lead, but the Freys? They might desert if they sense weakness." Robb looked out over the ranks of tents, hearing the clank of armor, the distant neigh of horses. The war felt endless, a shifting puzzle with no easy solution. "I'll send a large detachment north under Roose Bolton to deal with the Ironborn. If that's not enough, perhaps the Lords of the Vale can be swayed to help. I can't be everywhere at once. So it was decided. A significant portion of the northern host would break away in the coming days, traveling north to defend against the Ironborn. Bolton volunteered to command this force, bringing a contingent of Karstark's men and some of the lesser northern lords. Robb would remain in the Riverlands with a more modest force as well as Frey support, continuing to contain Tywin Lannister. The plan, while not perfect, seemed the only way to address both threats. Rosalind listened in quiet concern when Robb outlined the strategy to her. They stood beside her horse as grooms prepared the animal. Around them, soldiers were busily packing gear, forging new arrowheads, or seeing to the wounded from previous skirmishes. "Will Lord Bolton be able to save Winterfell?" she asked. "I hope so." Robb's voice was tight. "I trust that he'll do his duty, but if the Greyjoys truly have designs on the north, it might be a long campaign. At least the Ironborn are not numerous. They rely on quick raids." She nodded, though her brow was furrowed. "I'll pray for your family's safety." A day later, Bolton set out with his contingent, dust rising in their wake as they took the road north. The separation of forces made the remaining host look sparser. Many men worried that dividing their strength might leave them vulnerable to Tywin's main army. Yet Robb remained resolute. He could not forsake the north, no matter the cost. The vow he had taken to serve as king in the north encompassed the entire domain he had inherited. Weeks passed. Robb's smaller force harried Lannister supply lines and scouted for Tywin's main body. Edmure Tully guided them through hidden paths along the Red Fork and Tumblestone, hoping to catch their foes unawares. Every so often, a prisoner or a captured letter shed more light on Tywin's position. They learned that the Old Lion was indeed retreating toward the Westerlands, perhaps to fortify the region or to intercept fresh armies rumored to be rallying for the Iron Throne. The war had become a great labyrinth of second guesses. During this drawn-out campaign, Rosalind did her best to keep spirits from flagging. She visited the men who lay injured in makeshift field hospitals, offering them water or small comforts. She wrote letters for those who could not read, addressing them to family far away. Soon, the story of Queen Rosalind's kindness spread among the ranks. Some men called her the Gentle Wolf, though never in Robb's hearing, for he was their king and they feared any slight. But Rosalind, upon hearing it whispered, only blushed. She had never sought attention, only to do what little good she could. The Frey Knights, for their part, remained standoffish, neither betraying nor fully embracing their northern allies. Robb noticed that some Freys looked to Rosalind for cues. If she seemed content and loyal to Robb, they followed suit. A subtle dynamic emerged, as if her presence formed a bridge across which trust could flow. Yet tension simmered just below the surface. Robb remained ever watchful, mindful that old Walder Frey's love was as fickle as spring rain. One chilly dawn, scouts came racing back to camp with urgent news. Tywin Lannister's outriders had been spotted a mere half-day's march away. This was the clearest sign yet that the Lannisters were moving in force. The entire camp buzzed with frenetic energy. Armor was donned, horses saddled, pikes sharpened. Rosalind watched anxiously as Robb gathered his lords in a final war council, determining how best to respond. They decided to seize the high ground near a ravine that the Lannisters would have to cross if they traveled this route westward. The plan: fortify the ridges with archers and position cavalry in a hidden hollow ready to swoop in once the Lannisters committed to the crossing. It was an audacious strategy relying on careful timing and the assumption that Tywin wouldn't suspect such a trap. The Riverlords knew the topography intimately, so they would guide the main staging. Robb's role, along with his best cavalry, would be to strike the decisive blow. At midday, they broke camp. Rosalind insisted on following close behind the lines, though the safest course would have been staying farther back. Robb tried to dissuade her. "This could be our fiercest battle yet," he said gravely, adjusting the straps on his breastplate. "I'd rather you remain with the baggage train." She lifted her chin. "I will do so, my lord, but let me be near enough that I can tend the wounded. If men fall and there's no one to help them, more will die. I can organize water, bandages, anything." He could see the resolve in her eyes. She was trembling slightly, whether from fear or the chill, but he recognized that she wanted to be useful. "Very well," he conceded, "but stay behind the lines. Please." As the sun sank lower, they reached the ridges. It was a rugged area where the land dipped sharply into a winding ravine. The far side rose into a rocky escarpment that the Lannisters would need to climb if they wanted to avoid a longer detour. Robb concealed half his force in the gullies, while the other half took positions atop the ridges. The plan was to appear lightly defended, tempting Tywin to press a quick attack only to be ambushed from both flanks. Darkness came early in these hills. Torches and braziers were kept to a minimum so as not to reveal their position. All through the night, men waited in tense silence. The wind hissed through brittle grass, and the sky was heavy with clouds. Robb tried to rest, leaning against a boulder while gray wind lay at his feet. Sleep eluded him. He kept picturing his father's face, the stalwart calm he had always carried, and tried to find some measure of that strength within himself. Dawn would bring bloodshed, he was certain. And dawn did come, pale and cold. The Lannister outriders appeared first, moving cautiously. Archers atop the ridges kept low, sending ravens back and forth to confirm sightings. Then, mid-morning, the ground trembled with the march of thousands of soldiers. Red and gold banners rippled in the faint sunlight. The clang of armor and the rhythmic stomp of boots echoed through the ravine. Tywin's men advanced, evidently believing they might have the element of surprise. Robb crouched behind a rocky outcrop, flanked by the Great John and a handful of knights waiting for the signal. He saw them clearly now, a long column of Lannister infantry, crossbowmen, mounted knights in glittering plate. They spilled into the narrow pass, heads craning to see the crest of the ridges. Somewhere in the midst, Tywin himself might be riding under the lion banner, though from this vantage Robb couldn't make out the Lord of Casterly Rock. The tension in Robb's chest coiled tighter. Soon, the trap would spring. But if something went wrong, if the Lannisters discovered the hidden troops too soon, this could turn into a slaughter of his men instead. The signal came, a single horn blast from the opposite ridge. The Great John grinned like a madman, raised his own horn, and answered. In an instant, arrows rained from above. Lannister soldiers shouted, raising shields. Screams echoed as the first volley found its mark. Then a war horn sounded again, and Robb urged his cavalry forward, bursting from concealment at the base of the ridge. Gray wind bounded ahead, lips drawn back in a savage snarl. They charged into the flank of the Lannister column, smashing through the hastily formed ranks. Horses crashed against shields, swords flashed. The Greyjohn's war cry thundered in Robb's ears. On the other side, Tully bannermen descended from the ridges, attacking from the opposite flank. It was chaos and carnage, a brutal clash in the narrow confines of the ravine. Robb swung his sword with grim determination, cutting down a spearman who lunged at his horse. Grey wind lunged at another, ripping the man's throat out in a single savage motion. The smell of blood hung thick in the cold air. For a moment, it seemed the Lannisters might break immediately, but then the discipline of their core troops asserted itself. They reformed lines, crossbowmen took aim. Bolts whistled through the air, striking horses and men alike. Some of the Frey soldiers joined the fray, though Robb noted they were not at the vanguard. They circled from the rear, presumably waiting to see which way the battle turned. He felt a flash of irritation but had no time to dwell on it. Steel clashed, men screamed, the ridge trembled under the combined weight of so many fighters. Through the swirling melee, Robb guided his cavalry to punch holes in the Lannister formation while the archers above continued to rain shafts down. He caught a glimpse of a golden helm with lion crests, guessing it might be a high-ranking officer. Spurring his horse forward, he engaged the knight, crossing blades in a deadly dance. Sparks flew as steel met steel. Grey wind circled, snarling, waiting for an opening. The Lannister knight was skilled, but Robb had the advantage of momentum. He parried a savage downswing, then twisted his blade free and cut sideways, slicing through the knight's visor. Blood sprayed. The man toppled from his saddle. The battle raged for what felt like hours, though it might have been far less. Step by step, the Lannisters were driven into confusion, pinned between ravine walls. At last, the Greyjohn's men hammered their left flank, and Tully bannermen struck from the right. The line buckled. The red and gold banners quivered. A horn sounded, likely a retreat call from the Lannister side. Men began to peel away, seeking escape. Countless bodies lay on the ground, twisted in mud and gore. Some tried to surrender, others fled. Robb reined in his horse, chest heaving. His hair clung to his brow, damp with sweat and the mist of the cold morning. Around him, the Northmen and rivermen roared their triumph. Grey winds stood beside him, hackles raised, muzzle stained red. Another victory. Another battlefield scarred by death. He could scarcely draw breath as he looked around for signs of Tywin Lannister. But Tywin was nowhere to be seen, or if he was, his banner had vanished amidst the rout. They began to secure prisoners, gather the wounded, and account for the fallen. Robb dismounted, letting a young squire take his weary horse. His body ached from bruises and the sheer force of the melee, but he was alive. The Great John lumbered up, his broad face split by a wild grin. "My king, we've done it again." Robb forced a smile. "We have. But see to our wounded." The euphoria of victory was already giving way to the grim task ahead. He pressed through the aftermath, stepping around shattered lances and bodies. Calls for the maesters rang out. Rosalind, he knew, would be there soon, overseeing the bandages and water. He found her at the rear of the column, near the makeshift healer's area. Her face went pale at the sight of so many injured men, but she held herself together, directing helpers to lay the wounded in lines. When she saw Robb, relief flickered in her eyes. She reached for him briefly, as if to confirm he was real. "You're safe," she breathed. "I am," he said, voice low. "Thanks to our men." He looked around at the scores of injured soldiers. The victory was ours, but at a cost. She nodded, swallowing hard. "Show me how I can help." They spent the next hours tending to the aftermath. The moans of the wounded mingled with the whimpers of dying horses. Rain began to fall again, washing the blood into the rocky ground. Archers collected spent arrows, foot soldiers piled enemy corpses in grim heaps. The stench of death weighed heavily in the damp air. By nightfall, they had established a rough camp on the ridges. Fires dotted the slopes, but the mood was somber despite the triumph. They had dealt a significant blow to the Lannisters, an entire contingent scattered or slaughtered, and captured a few knights who might be ransomed. Yet Robb felt hollow. Each battle brought fresh casualties to the Northmen and the Riverlords. One slip and it could all turn against them. As he and Rosalind shared a meager meal of bread and salted beef under the protection of a large pavilion, they spoke in hushed tones. "Is there any word of Tywin?" she asked, sipping weak ale. "None. Some claim to have seen a figure in gold armor riding off before the end. That might have been him, or it might not." Robb rubbed his forehead. "He's elusive and he's patient. So long as he lives, this war won't be won easily." She placed a hand on his, her voice quiet. "You saved many lives by planning that ambush. More than you would have in an open field. I know it's still terrible, but it could have been worse." He nodded, though his gaze was distant. "It always could be worse. That's the fear." Within a few days, scouts reported that the Lannister force, or what remained of it, had indeed retreated west. No sign of Tywin came from the roads. The next question became, should Robb pursue them into the Westerlands, attempting to strike at their heart, or secure the Riverlands fully before pressing further? Edmure Tully counseled caution, better to reinforce and gather more men before venturing beyond familiar ground. The Great John, however, argued for a relentless chase to keep the lions from regrouping. Robb weighed both viewpoints. Meanwhile, a raven arrived from the twins, bearing Walder Frey's seal. Rosalind took it first, then brought it to Robb. He opened the parchment, expecting demands for new lands or titles. Instead, the tone was more urgent. Walder congratulated Robb on the victory against the Lannisters, but he insisted that Robb bring Rosalind back to the twins for a visit to show the realm the unity of our two houses. The old man's words carried a barb. "I trust you have not forgotten the worth of the Freys, nor the duties that come with wedding one of my brood." Robb set the letter aside, lips pressed into a thin line. "He wants to remind me he still holds the keys to the crossing. Perhaps he thinks I'm not paying him enough respect." Caitlin read it as well, frowning. "It may be a ploy to gauge your strength or your weakness. If you go, you risk letting Tywin slip away, or, worse, dividing your forces further. If you do not go, Lord Walder might take offense. And that could be dangerous." The phrase remained mercurial. Rosalind spoke softly. "If I might speak, my lord, my father would expect you to come in person. Sending me alone might seem a slight. But if you leave the army, will you not invite the Lannisters to strike?" Robb considered in silence, drumming his fingers on the edge of the table. "We could detach a small escort and go to the twins, but only if we're sure Tywin has withdrawn far enough that he cannot counterattack quickly. Otherwise, we risk the Riverlands in our absence." Edmure, standing with them, offered a thought. "We might garrison the crucial passes with our men, ensuring the Lannisters can't make a rapid move. A short journey to the twins could be managed if we move swiftly." The debate was tense. In the end, Robb resolved that a brief visit to the twins under heavy guard might be necessary to placate Walder Frey. The old man's support, however half-hearted, was still vital to the war effort, especially if Robb eventually intended to push into the Westerlands. Moreover, Walder would interpret any refusal as a sign that Robb was neglecting the marriage alliance. Given all the demands of war, a fresh betrayal by the Freys would be disastrous. So they prepared. Robb left Edmure Tully and the Great John in command of the main host, instructing them to secure the region and keep watch for any Lannister countermoves. He selected a retinue of trusted bannermen and a contingent of Frey soldiers who seemed loyal to Rosalind. Rosalind herself would, of course, accompany him. The journey would be swift, no more than a week or two. Upon arrival, Robb would pay his respects to Lord Walder, reaffirm the alliance, and return with renewed mutual goodwill if such a thing could be managed with the Freys. In a time of uncertain loyalties, it was the best plan they had. They set out under a sullen sky. Rosalind rode beside Robb, her guards forming a protective ring. The land through which they traveled still bore scars of war, burned farms, scattered bones near old battlefields, crows circling in silent fields. Winter was not yet upon them, but the chill in the air hinted it was coming. Each day, the road grew more familiar to Rosalind, while Robb kept a vigilant eye for any sign of Lannister activity or brigands. At last, the grim silhouette of the twins rose on the horizon, those twin towers that had come to represent both a gateway and a prison. The banners of House Frey still fluttered from the battlements. Robb felt a knot of tension forming in his stomach. This place carried a heavy legacy, and Walder Frey's unpredictable nature was the epitome of a necessary but volatile ally. They crossed the bridge into the courtyard. Frey men-at-arms came out to greet them, short bows of deference offered to Robb, deeper bows to Rosalind, their lady. The old castle smelled of damp stone, fish from the river, and the reek of the stables. A hush settled as Robb dismounted and helped Rosalind from her horse. Lord Walder's summons had been abrupt, and none knew what mood would greet them. Inside, Walder Frey awaited in the same great hall where Robb had first pledged to wed a Frey. Surrounded by the usual throng of sons, daughters, grandsons, and bastards, the ancient lord sat hunched in his chair, knuckles resting on the top of his cane. The eyes beneath his wrinkled brow glimmered with cunning. He leaned forward as Robb and Rosalind approached. "King in the North," he rasped. "You haven't forgotten us after all. Come, Rosalind, girl, come here. Let me look at you." She stepped forward, curtsying, and he clasped her chin between his bony fingers. "Well, you're not starved or bruised, so I suppose the wolf treats you well enough." Rosalind's cheeks flushed. "He's been kind to me, father." Good. I'd hate to have to remind him of his duties." Walder Frey shifted his gaze to Robb. "You've done well in the fighting, so I hear. Beating the lions on their own ground, TSK. Impressive for a pup." Robb forced a polite bow. "My lord, I came because your letter suggested our alliance needed renewal. I assure you, House Frey remains vital to our efforts. We couldn't have achieved these victories without your men." That made Walder Frey chuckle, a rattling sound. Yes, flattery will do. Sit, both of you. Let's share some wine, I'm eager to hear more of your battles." A feast was arranged that evening, though not as grand as the wedding feast, for supplies were strained by the war. Still, meats were served, bread and honey made a modest showing, and Lord Walder had his best wine poured. The gathered Freys eyed Robb warily but greeted Rosalind with a modicum of warmth, or at least feigned politeness. She found herself cornered by half-sisters, stepmothers, and cousins, each asking a flurry of questions about the war, the North, and Robb's temperament. She answered with as much diplomacy as she could muster. Robb sat at Walder Frey's side, answering the old man's pointed inquiries about the Lannister host, the fate of Riverrun, the condition of the roads. Walder complained incessantly about the difficulty of feeding so many Freys, the shortage of coin, the raids that sometimes plagued the outskirts of his domain. Every so often he hinted at wanting greater compensation, perhaps in the form of a suitable keep in the Riverlands or new trade tariffs. Robb navigated the conversation carefully, offering respect and hints of future rewards, but never committing to anything that might alienate his own bannermen. As the evening wore on, the music in the hall took on a livelier tone, some of the younger Freys dancing near the trestle tables. Rosalind observed from her seat, politely clapping along. Robb excused himself for a moment and approached her, hand extended. She hesitated, remembering the night of their wedding. Then she allowed him to lead her onto the makeshift dance floor. The minstrels played a gentle reel, and they moved in slow circles. The eyes of half the castle were upon them. Lord Walder watched with narrowed gaze, drumming his cane in time with the music. When the dance ended, polite applause scattered through the hall. Robb escorted Rosalind back to her seat. She leaned toward him, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "He's testing you," she whispered, glancing in her father's direction. Robb nodded, equally quiet. "He wants to see if I'll bend to each demand. I've agreed to nothing yet, but I can't be too rigid." She bit her lip. "Be careful, Robb. My father can turn quickly if he senses even the smallest slight." They withdrew early that night, tired from travel. Lord Walder gave them the same chamber they'd shared during the wedding, a space that felt both familiar and strangely oppressive. Outside, Frey guards lurked, their presence both protective and watchful. Robb paced near the shuttered window, tension radiating from him. Rosalind sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded in her lap. "What if he insists on the Hornwood lands again?" she asked softly. Robb sighed. "Then I'll have to refuse him politely, but find something else to offer, perhaps a profitable arrangement of trade with the North, once we are free of war." He paused, turned to her. "I'm sorry you're caught in the middle." She gave a small shake of her head. "I chose to be at your side. I just hope my father doesn't push matters too far. They slept fitfully, shadows pressing in from the silent corridors. Morning came, and with it more parley. Walder Frey requested a private audience with Robb in his solar. The room was cramped with genealogical charts, old ledgers, and half-finished missives. Walder sat behind a table, tapping his cane on the floor. Rosalind stayed by Robb's side, though the old man waved a dismissive hand at her presence. Several of Walder's brood lingered behind him. Now, boy, Walder began, we must speak plainly. This war of yours drags on. My men tire of endless fighting. If I am to keep them in the field, I need guarantees. What do I get when the battles are won? Robb stood tall. You'll have the gratitude of the North, my lord, and the favor of the king in the North. I'll see the trade routes through the twins flourish once peace is secured. Goods from the North will pass through your crossing. Taxes and tolls will enrich House Frey. Beyond that, we'll make sure any rebellious lords in the Riverlands who once scorned you are brought to heel. Walder's lips twitched. Pa, gratitude. Men don't feed on gratitude. I want something more solid, a guarantee that House Frey's station rises above the lesser houses who've scorned me. Perhaps a strong seat in the Riverlands, Harrenhal, maybe. A raspy laugh escaped him, though there was a greedy gleam in his eye. Yes, Harrenhal would be a fine seat. Robb frowned. Harrenhal is a cursed ruin, my lord, and also not wholly in my gift. It's contested territory. The Iron Throne has a habit of granting it to whomever they fancy. Even if I could offer it, it's half-burnt and enormous. Maintaining it would bleed a lord's coffers dry. Walder banged his cane. Yet it's a symbol. You think I don't know it's cursed? I care little for ghosts. I want the recognition. If not Harrenhal, then name me Warden of the Trident or some such title. Show the realm that House Frey stands nearly equal to House Tully. His tone was sharp, demanding. Robb breathed steadily, aware that Frey was pushing the boundaries. A title of that sort might be possible once we've secured victory and the North's independence is recognized. But as you know, there are many steps before we reach that point. Tisk, always conditions. Walder Frey's gaze flicked to Rosalind, who had remained quiet. And you, child? Does your lord husband not see reason in rewarding your dear family? Rosalind bowed her head. Of course, father. But as the king says, the realm is in chaos. Many things remain uncertain. We must be patient. Walder scowled, but the spark in his eye softened a bit at her gentle tone. He turned back to Robb. Fine. I'll not press you too far today, boy. But I'll hold you to this. Remember, if you fail in your promises, the twins can still close to you like a snare. Robb inclined his head. I haven't forgotten. They concluded the discussion with a vague agreement that once the war ended, if the war ended, Walder Frey would receive an elevated station, likely a new title and increased toll rights. It was not Harrenhal, but Walder seemed mollified for the time being. Robb left the solar feeling the old man's eyes boring into his back. Outside, Rosalind sighed softly. That went better than I feared. Robb exhaled. He still wants more than I can give. But at least we've bought ourselves time. They spent 3 more days at the twins, enduring Walder Frey's alternating bouts of flattery and bitterness. The atmosphere improved slightly when news reached them of another northern victory against a roving band of Lannisters. Walder crowed that it was thanks to his men's valor. Robb allowed him that boast if it kept the old man content. On the final evening, a smaller feast was held in the hall. Rosalind's half-siblings performed a clumsy dance, while other Frey cousins played lutes and pipes. It had the air of forced merriment, but it was preferable to open hostility. When at last Robb announced his intention to depart, Walder Frey demanded a formal farewell. Go then, he said in the presence of the assembled Freys, and keep Rosalind safe. I'll be watching. If you do right by her, you'll have no cause to fear me. His tone implied the reverse was equally true. The next morning, Robb's retinue crossed the long bridge again, leaving the twins behind. Rosalind rode in silence at his side, perhaps relieved to be free of her father's scrutiny. Yet a lingering unease accompanied them. Walder Frey had allowed them to leave unscathed, but the old man was never truly placated. Still, it was enough for the moment. They had reaffirmed the alliance, fragile though it was. Upon rejoining the main host, Robb received word that Tywin Lannister had indeed retreated further west, probably consolidating with reinforcements. Some suggested Tywin might even be returning to King's Landing to shore up defense around the Iron Throne, given Stannis' recent defeat. The path seemed open for Robb to strengthen control over the Riverlands. Yet each fresh triumph brought new complications. The River Lords, especially those whose lands had been ravaged, demanded justice. They wanted the fight taken straight to the Lannister heartlands. They wanted retribution for burned villages and murdered kin. Robb gathered his bannermen to discuss their next move. Edmure Tully, the Great John, Karstark's remaining men, and the Frey captains who had traveled back with him. Maps were laid out again, showing the roads to the Westerlands. Attacking the Lannisters on their home ground would be bold, but also dangerous. The terrain favored the defenders. Gold mines and loyal bannermen would bolster Tywin's strength. Yet if they succeeded, the political blow to House Lannister could end the war. Pride and revenge lured many into advocating for the assault. Rosalind remained outside the tent this time, but Robb could imagine her silent concern. He thought of the North as well, worried about how Roose Bolton's detachment fared against the Ironborn. No new ravens had arrived with updates. The uncertain fate of Winterfell gnawed at him day and night. In the council, the lords exchanged heated arguments. The Great John all but shouted, "We didn't come this far to turn back. One more thrust and the lions will bleed dry." Karstark's men nodded, though more subdued since the death of Lord Rickard's 2 sons at the hands of the Lannisters. Grief burned in their eyes, fueling a desire for vengeance. Edmure cautioned, "The Westerlands are not easily taken. Their fortresses are strong and the roads can be treacherous. If Tywin is regrouping near Casterly Rock, he can defend indefinitely." Bolton wasn't there, he was in the north, but his measured counsel, so often in Robb's ear, lingered. Robb stood, arms folded, listening to each viewpoint. Tension crackled in the air. As king, he had to decide. He ran a hand through his auburn curls, looking at the map of the Riverlands, then to the west where the hills and crags rose around Lannisport and Casterly Rock. "My lord uncle," Robb said to Edmure, "can the Riverlands hold if I take the fight west?" Edmure pressed his lips together. "We can hold, but I cannot promise how easily. The men are weary. We've lost many to raids and forced marches." The Great John rumbled, "The men are weary of war, but if we do not press the advantage, the war will only drag on longer. Let us end it now." Robb's gaze roamed the tent. The Frey captains stood in stiff silence, not offering a strong opinion either way. Perhaps they waited to see which side would prevail, content to align with the winning argument. Finally, Robb drew in a deep breath. "We'll march west, but carefully," he said, voice firm. "We won't fling our full strength blindly. First, we secure supply lines in the Riverlands, establish strong garrisons, and gather provisions. Then we move. If Tywin tries to challenge us in open battle, we'll face him. If he remains behind his walls, we'll starve him out or lure him into a trap." It was a middle path. Enough aggression to satisfy those who thirsted for a decisive blow, tempered by caution to avoid a suicidal charge. The men nodded, though some did so more enthusiastically than others. The Great John grinned, slapping his thigh. "You've got the wolf's cunning, my king." Karstark's men offered subdued nods. The Freys said little, but Robb could feel their calculating eyes. Edmure appeared relieved by the plan, for it spared the Riverlands from the worst of any immediate Lannister reprisal. The war machine rumbled forward again, so the army reorganized. Messengers galloped throughout the region, coordinating with minor lords, calling bannermen to muster for the next push. Defenses along the roads were strengthened, ensuring no Lannister outriders could disrupt supply wagons. Blacksmiths in every friendly town hammered day and night, forging arrowheads, spear tips, and spare parts for armor. Winter was edging closer, and the days shortened, the sun too often veiled by clouds. Rain turned roads to mud. Delays multiplied, but Robb insisted they keep going. Swift action might yield a final victory. Rosalind tried to keep morale steady among the soldiers, offering a calm face amid the hardships. She helped distribute warm cloaks and blankets, fetched by local seamstresses from half-ruined weaving huts. Quiet nights found her by the campfires, speaking softly with wounded men, hearing their stories, offering words of comfort. Robb, seeing her compassion, felt a tenderness that mingled with gratitude. In a life overshadowed by war, the gentleness she displayed reminded him of the home he was fighting to protect. At last, they were ready to cross into the western hills. The morning they broke camp dawned bleak and cold, with a chill wind scraping across the land. Cavalry and infantry stretched out in long columns. Banners snapped in the gusts: House Stark's direwolf, House Tully's trout, House Frey's twin towers, and the sigils of many other allied lords. War horns sounded as the columns began to move. Climbing the hills was grueling. The terrain sloped and twisted, roadways giving way to rocky passes. Fog drifted in ghostly tendrils, and the wind moaned through narrow defile. Scouts rode ahead, scanning for Lannister outposts. Early signs suggested Tywin had indeed withdrawn behind the defenses of the Westerlands, but that left robber knights and raiders to harass the roads. Skirmishes erupted more than once, small bands of brigands testing the edges of Robb's lines. Each time, the Northmen and river lords beat them back. After a week of slow progress, they emerged onto a plateau overlooking a broad valley. Far to the west, the faint silver ribbon of a river glinted under a muted sun. Smoke rose in the distance, whether from villages or army encampments, they couldn't be certain. That day, Robb ordered a halt to establish a fortified camp. The men needed rest, and he needed clarity on the enemy's position. Night fell early in the high country, the mountains casting long shadows. Rosalind sat with Robb outside his tent, the two of them wrapped in cloaks near a small fire. Around them, the army settled into exhausted stillness. Soft murmurs and the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer punctuated the quiet. Rosalind gazed at the flickering flames. "Do you think Tywin is truly close?" Robb considered. "He might be. Or he might be further west, closer to Casterly Rock. We'll soon find out. Scouts ride at first light." She drew her cloak tighter. "Each day we push forward, and I wonder if peace is any nearer or if it recedes like a mirage." He studied her face, the faint shadows dancing on her cheeks. "I wonder that too. But I have to believe we can bring peace by ending this war on our terms. Otherwise, all this death has been for nothing." A gust of wind made the fire sputter. They both fell silent, lost in thought. In the hush, Robb recalled standing on the walls of Winterfell in another life, when the realm had seemed stable, before Ned Stark's death, before the crown had sparked 1,000 feuds. He'd been little more than a boy then, naive. War had forged him into something else, a leader, but also a man scarred by what he had seen and done. Rosalind's voice broke the quiet. "I wrote to my father this morning, telling him we march west. I tried to be as reassuring as possible. He has not replied yet." Robb gave a terse nod. "He'll wait to see what advantage he can wring from the next turn of events. That's his way." She nodded solemnly. "I know. And I know you think I'm too soft sometimes, but he is my father, and I wish he weren't so stubborn, so." He reached over and covered her hand. "I don't think you're soft. I think you're stronger than you know." They watched the embers glow. The wind carried faint sounds of men talking, horses stirring. For a moment, Robb let himself lean into her warmth, grateful that, amid the grimness of war, there was still a place for gentleness. The next morning, the scouts rode out before dawn, returning late in the day with news. Lannister outposts manned by a small garrison were scattered through the valley below, apparently a forward screen for something larger behind. Robb wasted no time. Under cover of darkness, he deployed his forces to encircle the outposts. At dawn, they fell upon them in a coordinated assault. The fighting was swift, culminating in the capture of the Lannister garrison. The prisoners revealed that Tywin was indeed not far off. Reports placed his main host near a fortress called Ashmark, a lesser holdfast loyal to House Marbrand. It seemed Tywin was gathering strength there. Bolstered by this intelligence, Robb pressed on. The roads grew narrower, twisting into the foothills that surrounded Ashmark. Resistance stiffened. Lannister patrols became more frequent, forcing Robb to slow his advance lest he stumble into an ambush. A series of skirmishes erupted along forest tracks and mountain passes, the Northmen often forced to fight uphill. Casualties rose and supply lines stretched dangerously thin. In the midst of these struggles, ravens brought troubling tidings from the north. The Ironborn had struck deep into the neck and captured Moat Cailin, that ancient stronghold vital for holding the causeway. That meant Bolton's forces might be bogged down, trying to retake it. If Moat Cailin remained in Ironborn hands, reinforcements from the north could not easily reach Robb. The king in the north risked being stranded far from home. The new threat weighed heavily on him. Each day, as he scanned the maps, he debated whether to continue pressing against Tywin or to wheel his army north once more. No easy decision presented itself. Retreat now might forfeit the gains in the Riverlands and embolden Tywin. Yet forging ahead risked being cut off if the Ironborn solidified their hold on the neck. Rosalind watched him brood, her eyes full of concern, but she said little, knowing the weight of command lay squarely on him. One evening, in a clearing where the army had paused, Robb conferred with Edmure Tully and his other captains. They discussed sending another detachment north to assist Bolton, but they had so few men to spare. Even the Freys seemed reluctant to part with more of their number, as if suspecting it might weaken the main force. The discussion turned acrimonious until Robb's stern voice cut through. "Enough. We stand or fall together. I want a bickering tear us apart. That's exactly what our enemies want." At last, they agreed to dispatch a smaller band under one of the northern lords to try and bolster Bolton's push for Moat Cailin. The rest would remain to hold the line here in the west, continuing to threaten Tywin's forces. Another compromise, another risky gamble. Late that night, Robb stood at the edge of camp, staring at the moonlit expanse of hills. Rosalind approached silently, placing a hand on his arm. "What troubles you most?" she asked. He let out a quiet laugh with no humor. "Everything. I'm too far from Winterfell, from my brothers, from the heart of the North. I wage a war that sprawls across half the realm. My father taught me that honorable men must fight for what is right, but this war, it twists everything." He paused, turning to look at her. "And I fear losing my home, my men, even you." She moved closer, the warmth of her body a stark contrast to the chill air. "I'm here by choice, Robb. I'll stand with you until the end, whatever it brings." He drew her into a tight embrace, burying his face in the softness of her hair. For a moment, the weight of the crown felt a fraction lighter. She smelled of lavender and smoke from the campfire. He closed his eyes, wishing they could stand like this in Winterfell's Godwood, safe from all warring kings. But that was a dream, and the world would not allow them such a reprieve. When dawn broke, they marched again, forging deeper into the western foothills. The roads were treacherous, choked with loose gravel and thick pines, perfect territory for ambushes. Lannister scouts were spotted frequently, fleeing when approached. The tension mounted. Everyone sensed a major confrontation looming. Somewhere ahead, Tywin Lannister or his generals would make a stand. They reached a wide valley cut by a rushing river that tumbled down from the higher mountains. On its far side, the fortress of Ashmark loomed, sturdy walls perched on a rocky rise, banners with the lion of Lannister snapping in the wind. Robb studied it through a spyglass from the shelter of a pine grove. Soldiers bustled behind the walls. He could see the flicker of metal in the courtyard. A large encampment sprawled outside, protected by earthen ramparts and sharpened stakes. Storming Ashmark head-on would be costly. Robb considered a siege, but the approach was uphill and the river crossing was narrow. The Great John urged an attack, but Edmure counseled caution. Rosalind, staying back at the main camp, awaited word with the rest of the non-combatants. The War Council argued late into the evening. Some wanted to flank the fortress, others to feign a retreat and lure the Lannisters out. Every plan carried risks. Tywin was no fool. If he was indeed here, he would have set layered defenses, perhaps even traps. At last, they opted for a combination of enticement and stealth. Half the army would show itself along the river, forming a camp in full view of the castle as if preparing a direct assault. Meanwhile, a smaller force would scale the steep hills to the north, where dense forest might conceal them in hopes of finding an unguarded approach. With luck, they might strike from behind while the defenders focused on the larger contingent at the river. In the gloom before dawn, Robb kissed Rosalind's forehead. "Stay here with the main camp. If anything goes wrong, get back to Edmure's position. He'll keep you safe." Her eyes were wide with apprehension. "You're taking the smaller force, aren't you?" He nodded. "I trust the Grey John to keep discipline on the main lines, but I need to lead the flanking maneuver personally. It's too delicate. We can't risk confusion." She held his hands for a moment, silent, then murmured, "Come back safely." His answer was a faint smile, touched with sadness. "I will try." With that, he departed. About 1,000 men accompanied him, Northmen hardened by the Riverlands campaign, some Tully scouts familiar with the region, and a token group of Freys. Through the early morning darkness, they began the arduous climb into the hills. The pine needles and rocky outcrops made footing precarious. Horses slipped on loose stones. Occasional glimpses of the valley below revealed the main army making a deliberate show of tents and patrols by the riverbank, hopefully drawing the defenders' attention. The hours dragged on. At midday, they halted to rest among stunted trees. A cold wind swept the ridges. From here, Robb could see the fortress from an angle, walls of gray stone, a squat keep, and beyond it the hint of farmland. He noticed watchtowers scanning the hills, but the thick pine canopy offered some cover. His scouts returned with word of a ravine that might lead close to the fortress's rear gate, though it was heavily overgrown and possibly guarded. Robb weighed the risk and decided it was worth a try. They pushed on, descending into the ravine. The walls were steep, the shadows deep. Twisted roots groped at the path. Every snap of a twig felt like thunder in Robb's ears. He ordered absolute silence. The men crept forward, bristling with tension. Gray wind patted at Robb's side, ears pricked. Now and then the direwolf growled quietly, but no enemy appeared. At last, they emerged onto a small ledge overlooking a back approach to Ashmark. A low curtain wall stood between two towers with only a sparse scattering of guards visible. Beyond, inside the fortress, Robb could glimpse movement, likely the bustle of men preparing for a siege from the front. If they could take these guards by surprise, they might open a gate, allowing the rest to flood in. Still, it was a gamble. The alarm could be raised at any moment. Carefully, Robb dispatched small squads to encircle the curtain wall. He led a group himself, creeping through the scrub grass and boulders. One Lannister guard, perched on the tower walkway, seemed half asleep. Another was chatting with a comrade. Robb's men strung bows, nocked arrows. With whispered commands, they took aim. The hiss of arrows signaled the start. 2 guards toppled instantly, arrows in their throats. The remaining few scrambled, shouting, but were cut down by a rush of Northmen who scaled the wall using grapnels and rope. Chaos erupted inside Ashmark's rear yard as the small force poured in, swords flashing, war cries echoing off stone. Alarm bells clanged. Grey wind bounded ahead, sowing terror among the defenders. Shouts and screams erupted on the parapets. More Lannisters rushed from nearby barracks, half-armored and disorganized. Robb's men fought with savage speed, determined to seize control before the defenders could mount a proper defense. Robb spied a gate mechanism that controlled the postern door. If he could open it fully, more of his men could flood in. He barked orders, cutting down a crossbowman who tried to aim at him from behind a wagon. His heart pounded. It was risky, but if they succeeded, they might take Ashmark in one swift stroke. They reached the gate mechanism, a massive wooden winch. Half a dozen Northmen heaved at it, cranking open the heavy door. Beyond, the rest of Robb's hidden force surged forward. The fortress's rear lines broke into panic disorder. A Lannister captain attempted a rally, brandishing a gilded sword, but Grey wind leapt upon him, dragging him down. Within minutes, the courtyard was a slaughter, bodies strewn in pools of blood. The fortress bells tolled frantically, echoing throughout the valley. Meanwhile, near the river, the Greatjon led a feigned assault on the main gate, drawing most of the garrison's attention. Arrows and stones rained down, but the Greatjon kept up a furious display as though preparing a siege. By the time word reached the front that the fortress was breached from behind, it was too late. The garrison collapsed in disarray, some fleeing toward the main keep, others throwing down weapons to surrender. When Robb's men finally wrested full control of Ashmark, the Lannister banners were hauled down. The gatehouse fell silent, save for the groans of the wounded. Robb stood in the courtyard, breathing hard, sword dripping. He gazed around at the battered walls and realized they had won a great victory. The strategic fortress was theirs. The path west lay open. Now, if Tywin Lannister was here, he must have fled or he had never arrived in person. In either case, the blow to Lannister prestige was enormous. The Greatjon and Edmure arrived soon after, leading the rest of the host inside to secure the fortress. The men cheered Robb's name, exulting in the swift triumph. Roslyn, who had waited anxiously behind the lines, entered hours later, accompanied by her guards. She found Robb inspecting the battered ramparts, his armor dented, clothes spattered with dust and blood. She rushed to his side, relief shining in her eyes. "You're not wounded?" He shook his head. "Only bruises. We took them by surprise. Ashmark is ours." She clasped his arm, swallowing the sight of blood around them. "Thank the gods. You've done what many thought impossible." But though he savored the success, Robb felt the familiar hollow ache that always followed battle. Bodies had been piled in the yard, Lannister and Northmen alike. He gazed at the stark proof of how victory was purchased. Then he looked at Roslyn, the worry still etched on her face, and he found a small measure of solace. That night, the army feasted on the captured stores within Ashmark. Despite the gloom of war, the men were in high spirits, toasting the young wolf who had seized a vital fortress from the Lannisters. Wine flowed and the Greatjon's booming laughter shook the rafters. Even the Freys joined in with faint smiles, presumably pleased by the show of Stark power. Alone with Roslyn in a corner of the keep, Robb allowed himself a moment of quiet relief. "We've come so far," he murmured, taking her hands. "If we keep pressing, we might force Tywin to negotiate or to risk everything in open battle." She searched his face. "You think we're close to an end?" He paused. "I can't be sure, but I must try. The North is still threatened by the Ironborn. If I can force a peace or a decisive victory here, I can return home to face the rest." She nodded, squeezing his hands. "I'll pray the gods favor us, Robb." In the weeks that followed, they consolidated their hold on Ashmark. Garrisons were placed, repairs begun on the walls. Scouts rode far into the Westerlands, discovering frightened peasants and scattered bands of Lannister troops. Tywin himself was nowhere to be seen. Rumors claimed he might have returned to King's Landing or that he was gathering a larger host near the coast. No one could say for certain. Meanwhile, the captured knights and lesser lords chafed under guard, cursing House Stark. Robb treated them honorably, allowing them to send letters for ransom. Still, the tension was palpable. Rosalind adapted to life within the newly seized fortress, helping to organize the small sept for daily prayers and ensuring the wounded received care. She found some casks of healing herbs in a storeroom, perhaps left by the Lannisters, and worked with the maesters to brew poultices. The men began to look upon her as a gentle presence in a place that still smelled of blood and fear. Her own presence in the Westerlands, rare for a Frey, seemed to confirm that House Frey was truly bound to the north. Even if Walder Frey himself was miles away, at least one of his own remained at the center of the king in the North's campaign. As winter's chill crept further south, Robb weighed his next steps. If Tywin lingered near the coast, then pressing onward might be unwise, especially with his lines stretched. Yet pulling back might look like weakness. The war had become a contest of stamina as well as strategy, each side hoping the other would break first. Food supplies dwindled in war-torn lands, and men were tired of constant battle. In his private moments, Robb often gazed west, beyond the horizon, wondering if Tywin was poised for some cunning counterstroke. Or he found himself gazing north, longing for a raven that would confirm the Ironborn had been driven out of the neck, that Winterfell was safe. Each day the ravens brought more uncertainty, no clear resolution. Rosalind sensed his restlessness. One cold evening, she found him on a rampart, cloaked in furs against the wind. The sky glowed with sunset's dying embers, painting the mountains in hues of rose and gold. She came to stand beside him without speaking. For a time, they merely looked at the horizon together. Then he spoke, voice low. When I first led the Northern Banners south, I thought we'd fight a brief campaign, avenge my father, and secure our freedom. Everything seemed so straightforward. Now, I feel like I'm caught in a web with no easy way out. She touched his arm. Wars are never straightforward. My father has always said alliances shift like quicksand. But you've come this far. The men believe in you. Even the Riverlords trust you more or less. And I? She hesitated, as if shy about revealing her feelings. Then she squared her shoulders. I believe in you. He turned to her, eyes reflecting the warmth of the sky. For a moment, the burdens of the crown fell away, leaving only a young man touched by her quiet faith. He raised a hand to her cheek, drawing her closer. The ramparts were deserted except for a distant guard, who looked away discreetly. Robb pressed a gentle kiss to her lips, the chill wind whipping at their cloaks. When they parted, he murmured, "Thank you. I never imagined I'd find comfort in a Frey, but I'm glad I did." She smiled faintly, a little tremulous. "And I never thought I'd love a wolf." They held onto each other in the dying light. Far below, in the courtyard, soldiers tended their fires, stable boys mucked out stalls, and the smell of roasted meat drifted on the air. War was not over. Danger loomed on every side. But in that moment, a fragile hope burned between them, defying the darkness that crept ever closer. A raven arrived the following morning, bearing news that changed everything. The message bore Bolton's seal, though not in Roose Bolton's hand. It spoke of Moat Cailin in dire straits, the Ironborn holding it against repeated assaults. Worse still, the letter hinted that Balon Greyjoy had made a bold move, sending raiders deep into the north, possibly even near Winterfell. The tone of the message was urgent, verging on desperation. Robb read it twice, his face taut with worry. He summoned his closest lords. In the keep's audience chamber, now flying the Stark banner, he conveyed the news. "The Ironborn sink their claws deeper into my homeland," he said, voice grim. "I cannot remain here indefinitely. We have to finish what we started or find a truce so I can march north." Edmure Tully, the Great John, and the other leaders exchanged uneasy glances. They saw the wisdom in returning to defend the north, but also recognized the risk of leaving Tywin unchallenged in the Westerlands. If they withdrew, would everything they'd fought for collapse? Rosalind stood quietly at the side of the room. She watched Robb wrestle with the choice and felt the tension that racked him. He was king in the north, but the realm demanded impossible decisions. House Frey's men likewise hovered near the walls, exchanging murmurs. They too worried that if Robb left, the war in the Riverlands would reignite and their advantage would slip away. At last, Robb lifted his gaze, resolve hardening in his features. I'll send an offer of truce to Tywin. Propose an exchange of prisoners, a negotiation of boundaries. If he refuses, I'll strike once more, try to force him to the table. Then I must return north. The Ironborn cannot be allowed to roam free in our lands. It was a bold plan, but perhaps the only one left. A raven was dispatched that day, carrying Robb's message to the Lannisters. The king in the north offered a cessation of hostilities in exchange for recognition of northern independence and the release of his sisters from King's Landing. He demanded a fair ransom for any other northern hostages and an end to all Lannister claims on the Riverlands. In short, it was a steep offer. Many doubted Tywin would accept, but the letter was sent nonetheless. While they waited for a response, the days grew colder. Autumn was giving way to the first true hints of winter. Snow dusted the higher peaks. Supplies dwindled. Robb's men grew restless, eager to see if this war would finally reach a turning point. Rosalind stood by his side as the vigil stretched on. Their marriage, once a mere political vow, had blossomed into a genuine bond tempered by hardship. She sensed the fear that gnawed at him, fear for his home, for his family, for the men who had followed him so far. Yet she also felt his determination. He was Eddard Stark's son, after all, a man who would not bend lightly. When at last a raven came bearing Tywin's reply, the entire fortress seemed to hold its breath. Robb took the parchment to his chamber, unsealing it in private. Rosalind, standing near him, saw his eyes flick across the words. A muscle in his jaw twitched. She could not read Tywin's letter from where she stood, but she sensed it was not good news. He let the parchment drop to the table. In a low, steady voice, he read the gist. Tywin Lannister refused all terms that would grant the North independence, declared that the traitor Robb Stark must surrender unconditionally, and threatened dire consequences if the Starks did not bend the knee. As for the Stark sisters, no mention was made of their release. The letter ended with Tywin's chilling remark, "A wolf without a den will soon perish." Robb's hand curled into a fist on the table. "So be it," he said quietly, fury simmering beneath the words. "If Tywin will not bargain, then we'll force him to. We march again, and soon." Rosalind's eyes filled with sorrow. "Then there's no peace." He closed his eyes for a moment, inhaling slowly. "No, not yet." Out in the courtyard, the men sensed the shift. Orders were given, gear packed. The king had chosen to fight once more. Soon, they would leave Ashmark, either to seek Tywin in battle or to turn north with whatever concessions they could wrest by force. The war drums beat again in the cold air, echoing through the stolen fortress. Winter crept closer, and the realm bled. But Robb Stark stood firm, the king in the north who had kept his vow to the Freys, forging a path through betrayal and bloodshed with a Frey bride at his side. And though the road ahead was fraught with peril, at least they faced it together, wolf and pup bound in an alliance of honor, tested by war and shaped by a hope that somewhere beyond the chaos of kings and crowns there might yet be a tomorrow free of strife.